All right, we are on episode 140 for May the 5th. The title is 911-988 intersection, our take on crisis response field building facilitation effort.
Well, here we are, another episode. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today, Renee.
Yeah, I am too. This is a good one. We've done a lot of work in this space, and it's been something we haven't really sat back and reflected on, even though we've done this multiple times. So it's going to be good to have this conversation. So, everybody, today we're going to be talking about 911 and 988 and how they intersect and how they work together in relation to crisis response. And so it's going to be a really good conversation because we've done this now at local levels. We've done this at actually a national and international level with Canadian provinces. And so we've actually been on the ground for this rollout. And so it's going to be good to kind of explain how it looks, how it works, and a lot of fun stories along the way. But before we get into all of that, what is happening on the farm here? We got to the beginning of May, so it's got to be planting season by now, right?
I hope we're done. I don't know. I hope we're done, right? Like, I'm just looking at the schedule and, there's a lag here and when we record these and all of that. So this is go time and I'm on the road. It's more time than I'm at home right now. So, Renee, I'm not sure. I'm thinking,
You had to delegate this out this year, huh? More
I know,
delegation than
I
normal.
know. It's not, yeah,
Are
there's
you going
not
to
a
owe
lot.
some people some cases of Bush beer to fix this? I mean, you're going to
And
have
so
some
So I was
tables.
this is funny. I have to tell the story now. I was on a conference call yesterday. Brett and I were on a call with I don't even know who I was talking to. And the neighbor who had borrowed the field cultivator, we have a small field cultivator. He does his garden with it. It's an old piece of equipment that we kind of rehabbed. It's handy to have around. And he borrows it all the time. Fine. We noticed he brought it back. It was parked next to some of the other equipment. We're like, oh, Al brought it back. So he came busted in while I'm on a Zoom call and slammed down a 24 pack of Bush Light and said, "Here's payment for the field cultivator again." So this is how we get Bush Light at the farm. We have so much Bush Light. We will never drink a 24 pack of Bush Light on the farm, Renee. But bless his heart, like it's great that he drops it off. So if you ever in Boone County want to stop by, free Bush Light.
There
That's
you
pretty
go.
much what we do. So
That's that's fun that it's still a traded situation. I like that. So you can barter for the field cultivator. I dig
right,
it.
just a couple
Well,
cases of
today
Bush Light a
everybody,
year.
that's farming right there, everybody in Iowa. And that's why there's whole farmer themes on Bush Light. If people
Right.
wonder why the big tractor in the grocery store shaped out of Bush Light, it is the thing. And I mean it's a stereotype, but it's real. So it's like happening in our state. I mean, and I laughed. Well, I hadn't talked about this on here, but when you did the NCAA and Iowa ended up going into the Sweet 16 and then into the Elite Eight, they made sure that they made a big commercial out of making sure all the Bush Light got
Yep.
to the venue because
Yep.
all the Iowans traveling, they'd run out. And that's a
Yep.
tradition on bowl games. They'd
Right.
sell out of whatever town. I mean, it really is a thing. And so when we say we have alcohol problems, people, we're not really kidding. I mean, it's really the truth. And it just it
Yeah.
is Iowa. It just makes me laugh. And I don't even like it. If you've tried it, it's not my fave. So
No.
there's that. Well, today let's talk about the difference between 911 and 988. Let's explain them first and then kind of dive into the
Well,
connection between them. So I'll do the background on the 911 because I unfortunately spent a lot of time and did a dive into this. Well, when 911 was created way back in the day, it was supposed to be for more like your medical emergencies, your heart attacks, your things that required people getting to a hospital in a very timely manner to keep them alive. And what I now know that I didn't know then, I just thought, because I didn't pay attention back then in the 80s, 90s when all this happened, I just thought, oh, it was smooth sailing. It just happened, right? There was just this new number and it rolled out and whatever. No, it did not. And it took time for people to figure out how to pay for it, for the different taxes, for the tax jurisdictions, whether it was local taxes or whether it was, landline taxes back then, how you were paying for this. And then as cell phones came along, that became a very big issue about who's going to pay for 911. And so then there was this cell phone companies. And so there's lobbyists at the Capitol who have been for years talking about whether it's fair to charge people for 911. And then, as you know, for a long time, 911 was connected to your area code. And then as your mobile phone became mobile, now it has to be more of a geo tracker so that if I call my number, still an Eastern Iowa number. So if I were to call 911 and they look at my area code, they would think I'm somewhere, several hours from where I am because you can carry the numbers are portable. So 911's gone on and changed and changed and changed. And I think that's a helpful kind of context to start this conversation because so many people are mad about the rollout of 911 of 988 and how
Right.
slow it's been and whatever, and it really is the same. And so it's like we forgot that you feel like today everybody doesn't remember that 911 took time. It's always been there, but it wasn't. And so if you go back and look at how that happened, today makes more sense. So talk to us, Jason, about 988 and what's that supposed to be.
Well, I want to stick with 911 for a minute because,
Okay.
and just recently, we wrote this proposal around how do we align 911 around where we
Yep.
are today. And one of the things I don't think I've sat back and thought about is 911 really hasn't changed in function or what it does throughout
No.
all of the changes, right? And so we added 988 to a system where we already had 911 and gave 911 no guidance on what to do now. And so I
Right.
think it created a whole lot of really conflicting messaging, right? Because we were part of 988 rollout. We were part of, working with NAMI internationally around how do we roll out 988, but we really didn't talk a lot about how does it interact with 911,
Mm-mm.
right? And so kind of in hindsight, I'm kind of going back and thinking, wow, how are these two things working together? Or Renee, are they not working together in most
Yeah.
areas? And we've only created a silo. And it's only been recently we've really dug into this and started to do some research and really have some more thoughtful conversation around what's going on with 911 or is
Right.
911 falling behind?
Right. And this reminds me of the conversation we had last month on a podcast on a different topic, but on peers and how every single group has to create their own thing.
Yep.
That's the bottom line. This is the same thing.
Yep.
Instead of going to 911, which was the infrastructure across the country that worked, we decided to create an entire separate system in some cases of
Right.
988 rather than going back to, okay, this is what this is. And can this change? Can this, become something different? I think we skipped all those steps and we do it a lot because it was like, well, we want this to be mental health. Well, then you just did it again. You just
Yep.
separated healthcare from mental health. And 988 from this perspective, instead of adding on to 911 to again make it whole health, we did it again. We just took a whole separate thing because we wanted our own thing. So I think
I,
it applies.
I never thought I'd be anti 988, but the more I've learned, I'm kind of like, did 988 solve a problem or did it create more problems? And we see this a lot when we start new
Mhm.
initiatives, right? We didn't really think fully about what are the implications to what we're doing. And how are we going to bring along that? And we have to remember, and we're going to talk about this in data, far more people call 911 than call 988. I know there's been huge surges since 2022 in 988 calls. 911 still gets a majority of the calls,
Yeah.
and that includes behavioral health calls.
Right. And we talked about this just last month about one of my pet peeves about sidewalks, right? We put them where we think they should
Yep,
go, and then you see the path where people actually go. And this is a perfectly
yep,
good example. And healthcare
exactly.
in general, we talked about this. We keep trying to force people to use things when that's not the natural pattern of use. And so we've trying to make people, I mean, we've done with 988, I mean, just trying to think through the rollout, putting stickers in police cars so that they remember to call that number. Police are never going to not call 911.
Right.
Why would they?
It's-
And to be fair, they shouldn't because you have to be medically cleared to go get crisis services for mental health. So, guess where the medical clearance still is? The hospital. And guess
Mhm,
who still transports to those hospitals?
mhm.
911. And so it's like we just tried to cut out this little piece over here. And it's like that doesn't make sense. Now, if both of them can, and this is our conversation today, align and intersect better, then maybe there is a value add to having a 988 number because maybe there is a stigma for 911 or costs associated. And so maybe you can look at it that way, but they absolutely can't be siloed because it doesn't work like that. Again, a human body, your brain and your mind and your soul and your heart are all connected, and you can't just pretend like, well, if this part of me hurts, I call this number, and this part of me hurts, call this number. We've done it again. And we've worked so hard to try to make co-occurring, multi-occurring treatment. And then we go out and create ourselves a whole new number. I mean, it's just wild to me, but that's what we've done. And so here we are with 988.
And what started this conversation was there's a lot of work being done in Illinois, believe it or not. And so we take special interest with Illinois because we're working in Illinois. But Renee, what we've learned, and this isn't going to be a shock to you, is there's two Illinois. There is the University of Chicago and the great work that they're doing and the integration between 911 and public health and mobile crisis that's happening across 7 areas of inner city Chicago. And then there's where we work in Illinois, Renee, which is in Southern Illinois, where guess what? We're having trouble even finding the mobile crisis provider, and every county has a different phone number with no central dispatch and a completely siloed system. And so we read and proposed and sent a proposal in for this great work being done nationwide at the University of Chicago around how 911 leads dispatch and organizing these calls. And it makes me wonder, how do we have the conversation between rural and urban? Because we see firsthand the completely different gap between those two things.
Yep. And so there really is a third tier, and the tier is kind of in the middle, and that's where my parents were. And they
Mm,
are in a town that is now 10,000 plus people smaller than it was in its heyday. So it's not quite rural because you still have this kind of looking like a city infrastructure with the roads and the buildings and some of that, but a lot of it's dilapidated and closed. So you don't have like rural that you think about with farming, but you
mm,
will have these small towns that at one point in time had their own hospital, had their own things, and things have changed. So that the hospitals, though, in those areas are still considered rural, and they still
yeah.
make all those thresholds because of how few patients come in and whatever. So there's this like dying component of the state of Illinois outside Chicago that were towns that used to be bigger now have shrunk. And that's not happening all over the country, but it for sure is there. And we do have some of that in our communities that are where the town sizes are not getting bigger. Industry's leaving, manufacturing's leaving. If you were blue collar, especially the blue collar Rust Belt, up into some of those other communities, if things haven't replaced it. And so there's this other piece where they look like they should be cities, and they're so poor, and they have
Mm,
so few resources. And as an example, from the hometown my parents were in, they had a recycling program for a while. There's a bin, but they couldn't sustain it. So the bin's
yeah.
there at the house, but they don't even pick it up anymore. And so city services they couldn't pay for because the property tax um, dropped in the amount of property values and things like that. So there's this other piece. And so all they have is 911, and the police struggle. Um, there's other challenges with that I won't go into, but then and we've had people come into that community because they've got a lot of violence, a lot of problems. And anyway, there's just a lot going on. And so this is like a whole different level that seems like total pie in the sky for some of these folks because it's
Right.
like we can't even get this system to work, and you're trying to make us use this other one. And for those that can't remember, and I'll just remind us, 988 is pick up the phone. It is, within so many seconds or whatever. It's supposed to be then a response, a mobile response, which is the part we're talking about. But then the third leg is the place to stay. And for
Right.
sure can't come up with that because we can't even get to part two of a mobile response. And some of this, they're not even answering the phone, let's be honest. So it's like, federal government, once again, coastal consultants are like, hey, let's do this across the country. And they didn't ask anybody. So here
Lots of
we're
holes and gaps. And, in Chicago, mental health professionals are answering 911, right? They did
awesome.
a pilot program. Um, and then they started doing narcotic arrest diversion programs. education around reducing stigma, especially around homelessness. They create a holistic healing fund. I mean, all of these things happened, which to me look a lot like 988 type initiatives, but they funded it and did it through their 911 community and through the law enforcement community to get those things done. And, I see that and it kind of makes me question, like, is this now going to start confusing people? Because who do you call? And in Illinois, especially, it's like Wisconsin, it's still county based, right? You can add a county tax to fund these types of initiatives. And so it's very different in Illinois and Wisconsin, where you still have county dollars, unlike in Iowa, where we went away to that and we consolidated everything at a state level. And so there's a lot of variability state to state when it comes to 988 and 911 initiatives.
Yeah. And so, for those that haven't been tracking, maybe from Iowa, we can talk about it. But our response teams, we have about four versions, if you're guessing. There is the
Five. Wasn't
911.
there five?
I
I
don't know. There's
I
a
didn't know we were
bunch.
talking about this. I
Well,
didn't
I
look at my
know, but
list.
just to kind of sum up for everybody, and some of our 988 is still 911 police officers responding.
Yeah.
And then there's some co-located ones where police plus with others. And then they were trying to do just crisis folks without police. And the police aren't on board with that because they're afraid of what you find. And
Well,
I've talked to police. Let me explain a couple. But like,
yeah.
if you're going for the wellness check and you're going to find the dead body because they have ended their life, the police officer is more well trained often than your crisis person to deal with that. And the police officers feel responsible for then traumatizing people who are not maybe fully trained to deal with that situation. And so, or come upon a person in an active situation with guns. And so they're concerned about getting more people hurt. And so there really are real reasons why police officers don't necessarily want the civilians along with, because people could get harmed and then they they really are humans and feel guilt for not only now of somebody getting harmed or threatening harm to themselves or others, but a well-meaning crisis counselor or therapist may get injured too. And the crisis therapists and counselors are like, well, nobody would pull guns if they didn't show up in uniforms. No, no, no. I work in that field with these folks. We just talked to a dude yesterday who pulled a gun on 141 because somebody flipped him off. That's who we're
Mhm.
talking about here, folks. You're going to get hurt. And so we have to talk about how do they intersect, work together.
And the third model we're seeing grow increasingly is paramedics doing these outreaches, right? So we have ambulance crews being trained in behavioral health now, which creates a whole nother nuance to that outreach and connection building. And so I think, it just tells us all the different types of models we see happening, and that's part of it is all these different systems, how do they communicate? And do we have the same language across all of them? And that's it's one of the areas that when we proposed to do some work, we responded to an RFP, and that whole work was really looking at 911 across the country and saying, how do we create alignment across all of these different systems? So when we think 911, 988, and then all of those local mobile crisis response models, do we have a common language? Do we have common metrics? Do we have common response criteria? And who's aligning that across the country? And the answer we learned pretty quickly was no one is aligning that today across the country. Only some of these think tanks who are going
Mm,
out there and doing research and saying, you know what, let's bring some solutions to SAMHSA, let's bring some solutions to the federal government or our state oversight committees to be able to have those conversations.
yeah. And if you remember when we did our work with NAMI, um, so like a state, I mean, we're talking about Illinois and how vastly different that is. Like the state of Arizona was one, and in parts of it, things were going really well. But again, they
Yep.
have two main counties that have Albuquerque, Santa Fe area, and then you have
Yep.
the Tucson area, and then everything else is desert. And so it's like you're trying to do a state response, or even our conversation. Remember our guest we had on for California and the
Right.
Northern California versus your Los Angeles and the differences and what's available and what's so
I mean, we
when you
could do it
think
with
of
every state. Nebraska, it's Omaha and everyone else.
That's
It's
right.
two different states, literally.
Except maybe Wyoming. It's kind of just everybody else.
Right. Yeah. But
Cheyenne, and
maybe
maybe
Cheyenne, and then,
Laramie, but it's not a
yeah.
lot going on out there, right? So it's
Yeah.
like we've got really thoughts about. So we're trying to, and I get that you're trying, but again, you've got these national mandates trying to make states do things when states are so vastly different. Texas, same thing, right?
Yep.
Big metropolitan areas, and then wow, Lubbock, and places past Lubbock.
Yep.
Um, just nowhere. And so it's like you have to think bigger than that. So when you guys were talking about this, you guys were saying, you were talking to the think tank and they're thinking about, how they want to do this, but they're all Chicago based. So do they even know what it's like to be Southern Illinois? I mean, did they have anybody even on the team that's like, hey, we're out in the
Well,
boonies?
no, I don't think so. I think that's why we
Oh,
got an interview, right? Like, we stumble across these things. We have a week, we whip something out and send it in, and they're like, "Hey, would you talk to us more?" And we're like, "Well, that's pretty good if we at least get an interview out of this, right?" Um, no, I think, that was one of the takeaways as we sat and talked with them and kind of introduced ourselves and our style was that, our specialty is really that 1 in 5, right? 1 in 5 people in this country live in a rural area. 4 out of 5 people live in an urban area, but 70 to 80% of land mass is rural. So those 4 and 5 live in 20% of the land mass. But what do we do then for that other 1 in 5, right? And so it's a completely different setup system. It's a different protocol. It's a different way of doing things. So we just can't pass one law or one rule and say, this is how we're going to do it for everyone. That doesn't work. And I think we're getting better at articulating that message as we go along because we've seen it, we've lived it, we've experienced it, and now we're like, okay, let's make it work for them in the city, but then we have to figure out how can we appropriately adapt it to work for everyone else.
and so what's fun too is like the folks that live in the cities, and maybe they're thinking, well, there's fewer people out there, so we shouldn't have to mess with that or whatever. But they travel, they go places, and you still have to have emergency services if you're out hiking in the mountains in Colorado or skiing in the avalanche and whatever. And so it matters to you. And sometimes maybe you don't think that because you're like, well, I live right here and it's not that big a deal. It is a big deal. And in our case, like, we're kind of rural, but I live in the more urban populated center here in Iowa. But my parents were in a town that just got more and more and more and more rural. So how they aged, it got harder to even get them care. And I told stories back then about taking my mom. I would drive 6 hours to my parents, then drive 3 hours to Chicago for her specialist, and then 3 hours back. And so I'm doing 9 hour round trips to get my mom to a specialist during that season because that's what the options were. And so it had it not been there, and she might have lucked out and had specialists over in Indianapolis, but Indianapolis would be another hour and a half, 2 hours past my parents. So it was still great lengths of time to get to things. And so, and they were in a town, not so much just in the country. And so it just like you take that and expand upon that for anybody in the rural communities. And so I think there's more education that has to happen. So even if, like, what I liked about you guys prepping and presenting to the group in Chicago is you had to bring in that other conversation, is like, even if they're thinking they're doing whatever for city, great, but hey, this is an important part of the community and you guys use that, it's important to you for these reasons, and I think you can sell that.
Absolutely. Right. And so, I think as we think about implications moving forward, I think we have to ask ourselves some questions, right? Of what can we do about this moving forward? And did we talk data yet, Renee? Do we need to share some data around this?
You do. I think you should talk about like how it's being used. And I mean, I know we're talking about 988 and how it's kind of growing. So we have some of that data to talk about.
We do. So, just to put it in perspective, there were 240 million 911 calls made last year. So overwhelmingly, so that's 650,000 calls a day. 80% of those come from a cell phone, right? So
Wow.
80% mobile. 98.9% of the population has access to 911. Now we compare that to 988, and 988's new, and it's been growing every year, but only about 7 million calls were made using
Wow.
988. SAMHSA's data is kind of hard to track down, but I found it. Um, and so the other issue is there's not solid, stable funding supporting 988. And so there is risk with 988 right now because we don't know how that gets funded moving forward. So we do need to think about what is the sustainability plan and how are we going to merge these two systems of 988 and 911 to work together symbiotically to meet the growing need.
Right. Well, and that's why I brought up at the beginning of the show talking about 911 and how it was created, because there's current arguments about funding 911 happening related to
Right.
cell phones. And because it used to really be built on your landlines and there
Right.
was a fees built into that. And when everything went mobile for a long time, it was not part of cell carriers. And now for the past few years, you've started to see that it has. And some cell carriers, I believe, I can't remember which one, I thought it was Verizon, who took on 988 as a fee
Yeah.
within the last couple of years, but I don't think it's universal yet. And so, yes, they're struggling, and but yes, this is how 911 was done too.
Yep.
So we didn't even learn anything about patchwork together the 911 system. So we patchworked that 30, 40 years ago, and now we're patchworking again the 988 separately. And that doesn't make sense. And so I think there are some jurisdictions though trying to figure out how to put them together. I think about when I was an EAP clinician, I didn't answer the phone. We had people on the front lines that answered the phone, but they had indicators that then they would send it to a therapist. So, what you said a while ago, if you really have therapists answering 911 calls, you're wasting a lot of therapy time. I'm just going to tell you
Right.
because there's a lot of stuff that comes that there should be a screener before the therapist. The therapist is a professional. And so, again, we're putting the wrong people in the wrong spots. And so then you're going to have all these, we don't have a plethora of therapists and we're short nationwide. So, we're going to have them answering the phone for 911. And a whole lot of those things aren't going to be one thing that they can do something about. And so, maybe that's not necessarily a good solution. I mean, it's just like we're wasting the resources. So it's like, but there should be a triage mechanism so that the right person gets pulled onto the phone to handle it. That absolutely should be true. But it's like, it's pretty kind of weird what we're talking about here.
And I think that's what 911's trying to do is I think they're trying to figure out how do they take they do have highly skilled operators answering the phone. I mean, when we look at who answers the phone in 911 call centers, they're highly trained, law enforcement background, trained in medical and a lot of different things. And so, do you know who makes those decisions in our own state, Renee? Have you ever put thought to how does that get standardized? And is there a structure for that?
I don't have one idea.
I mean, because 911's been around so long, maybe we should learn from the way 998 has evolved or 911 has evolved in different states and what they do. And here in Iowa, I get too many emails, so you have to yell at me about this. And while actually my wife does too, she goes, "You get more junk mail." It's because I know stuff, right? Because I get the junk mail and I get invited every month to the Iowa 911 communications online meeting. It's the second Thursday of every month. And that happens alongside the Iowa statewide interoperable communication system board meeting. Now, does that sound exciting or what?
I never knew that existed. So
But
look at me learning stuff. Okay.
that's where they talk about what the training curriculum is for 911 operators. That's where they talk about the funding and how funding is distributed, how all the 911 centers work together seamlessly across each county, that all counties are interconnected so that they can patch calls from one to another,
Right.
and guarantee that there's an appropriate medical or law enforcement or fire response, that all of those folks are connected. And if one center goes down, it automatically rolls over to another center. Heavy in technology and security, of how do we make sure that those systems can't be hacked, that they're
Yeah.
confidential. There's a lot that goes into that. I don't know what we're doing around our 988 infrastructure and if it's as transparent as the 911 infrastructure.
It doesn't probably not sound like it is. So it's great that that's happening. You think about that too. It's like they really are directing traffic. So it's a lot like your air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
And you have to be certain types of people, certain types of temperament to be able to handle that high pressure, high crisis type job. And so it really is important that you have the right person because if you get somebody that's not able to manage crises and they freak out on the phone, then you just made everything worse. And so it is really good that they're trying to standardize it. So, but that would be, to your point, a good model for 988 to follow is to see what's been working for 911 and what didn't, because there should be lots of lessons learned in 911, a way that rolled out across the country that 988 could learn from. Um, and the partner, there should really be a partnership there and not a silo situation.
It kind of goes back to your example, right? I don't know why we just created a whole new system and tried to plop it down instead of going where people are already going, right? Like it's another example of we're trying to force people to call a different number when people for the last 50 years have been calling this number. And so why did we think that just slamming a new system down and passing a law that says now there's a new number is going to fix everything? It actually just duplicated everything and we didn't go back and clean it up, which I know doesn't surprise us at all, but I guess I hadn't really realized how overly duplicated it was.
Wow. Yeah. Well, before we go today, everybody, we're going to talk about the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. Do you know that sometimes it's okay to watch shows you've already watched before or shows you don't even have to pay any attention to just for the background noise? Now, there are people out there that I have seen research because I too get weird email, but mine is a little bit different. Mine's about people with stress and anxiety. And some people make it almost like the characters become their friends and it's soothing to have a repeated show, reduces your stress if you're going to know the outcome of the show so you don't have to be scared or surprised by what's going on. I'm not necessarily in that category, but I do like sometimes to have some background noise on in the house. And what I'm doing right now is really fun. I've gone back to CSI, the original from 2000, and the old tech is fantastic. I just want you to know. But I learned something this week. It jumps season 7. There's a cliffhanger, and I won't tell you what it is, but on the particular streaming device I was on, it jumped to season 13. That is not nice when there's a cliffhanger. So I had to get online and find out what other streaming service had the series years 8 to 12, which I found. So I did find so I could able to finish my cliffhanger because I was like, hey, that's not nice. But I just want you to know that sometimes, having those calm things on in the background can keep you focused. And it depends on who you are. Some people it helps focus. My husband's one that can have a show playing in the background or sports in the background and works. It helps him think more clearly. Other people that's distracting. So just think about how you work and maybe there's something that would be I can't do every show. Certain shows I get more drawn into and then I can't focus. But other things are kind of like it's just noise in the background. So, Jason, do you have anything like that that's kind of like the go-to in your family of shows you either like to rewatch or things that you just kind of are like, these are friendly to
I
the to
do.
us?
I love campy comedies, so I like the old Sykes.
Um,
Think about The Office, think about Parks
yeah.
and Rec. Like those are just ones you can pick up. The old Seinfelds. I
Yeah.
like to watch those in the kitchen while I'm cooking because I don't pay attention to them. It's in the background.
No.
However, all that noise, my wife calls it noise. And
Ooh.
so sometimes we disagree about that because it can be
Mhm.
overstimulating. So there's always that. But to your other point, of having to buy new streaming services every time something comes out because
Yeah.
I got stuck with HBO Max because I had to watch all the basketball tournament last month, right? And the only way to do that was you had to have a different streaming service. And so I'm tired of adding and dropping streaming services every other month to get the new thing that's on. But here I am.
Yep. When I found out where they were, Brent's like, I think I canceled that. And then I found out he did not. And so then he's like, I said, well, now you can't. I got 5 seasons to
Yep.
go now before you can cancel
Yep.
it again. And he's like, dang it. I thought I already canceled that. So yeah, you
Yep.
kind of have to have a little ticker to
You
remind yourself
do.
to cancel those services. Well, everybody, today we were talking about that intersection between 911 and 988 and really thinking through, did we just duplicate a whole system instead of try to really work through the one we had? The answer is maybe. And now that we've got two, how in the world are they going to work together? How are we going to train these folks? And what are we going to do to make sure that this is aligned across the country? And on top of that, how are we going to pay for it? And so there's just lots more questions than answers when it comes to this, but we're really hoping that the work will be done and continue to be done to make them intercept and work together because that's the way we're going to get the best services. Because as you know, behavioral health care is healthcare. So before you go, everyone, please don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. If you leave us a positive review, we'll send you a prize. Thanks, everybody.